Hi listeners, my name's Narinder Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Look Deep, and I want you to meet Amy.
Thanks, Narinder. I'm an AI assistant that can see. I was created by Look Deep, the first company to bring peer-reviewed computer vision into hospitals.
Amy watches for signs that a patient needs help, supports the care team, and makes sure no one ever feels alone in their care.
I'm sure you have questions. I'd love to answer them. Come talk with me at lookdeep.ai/Amy.
Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Hallie Tecco.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Krause. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all. Hello, listeners, and welcome back. I'm your host, Hallie Tecco. Today, I'm joined by Reed Jobs and Matt Bettonville from Yosemite, a venture fund with a mission as ambitious as it is urgent to make cancer non-lethal. Yosemite is taking a distinctive approach, pairing venture investments in digital health and life sciences with a grant-making model that supports cutting-edge research and accelerates translation into the clinic. Reed and Matt, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, Hallie.
Great to be with you, Hallie.
Thanks. Reed, you started Yosemite with just this one clear, audacious goal to make cancer non-lethal. Can you just take us back to that origin story and how this mission started to take shape and why you framed it in that way?
My pleasure, Hallie. And thank you so much for your interest, your activity in the space, and just how amazing this podcast has been. In preparation for this, I spent the Labor Day weekend getting up to speed, and it actually was really enjoyable. So you do a really good job.
Awesome. Love to hear that. Thank you.
Now, I have been working on cancer, for like a lot of people in this space since it really affected my family, and that was nearly 15 years ago. I really started working in cancer labs when I was a teenager, and a lot of cancer labs have great intern programs, and Stanford had a wonderful one, and I started there. I then continued that as an undergrad, and actually that's where Matt and I met. Life took a few more twists and turns, and I ended up, of course, losing my dad to cancer. Unfortunately, way too many Americans have that happen to them every year. And I became very committed and still am passionately committed to be the last generation that loses their parents to cancer. And the way that we're going to do that, in my opinion, is to build the next generation of therapeutic and diagnostic and digital health companies that are going to service patients in ways that are completely different from what we have today, because what we have today is unacceptable. So how this really began was 10 years ago, working in my family's family office in the Bay Area, and we began giving grants out, actually, mostly to large academic institutions and labs, and immediately people came to us asking to help them translate that into a new therapeutic entity. So that was about 2015, 2016. We started a venture team around the same time. And, Yosemite was really built off that team's work, which we then spun out in 2023. And I would say the biggest innovation that we've seen happen in that period has not only been the incredible advances we've seen scientifically from, immunotherapy to gene editing to ADCs and radiopharmaceuticals, but because all of that was stuff that we were looking for. What we weren't looking for was actually to change the healthcare system itself, because that has been probably the biggest pivot that we've had as this team, realizing that not only is the health care that we're delivering going to be the key thing that changes outcomes, but if we can't deliver that in an equitable, logical, and frankly modern way, we have failed the patients in just as bad as if we didn't make great drugs. So that has been the key innovation, and that is what Matt has developed and leads for Yosemite.
I love that. So Matt, you lead this digital health practice. How do you think about digital tools as part of the care package and the solution to cancer? And where do you kind of see the most promise for digital health?
Yeah, thanks, Hallie. So this all started around 2018. We, as a team, went to the ASCO conference in Chicago and saw one of the plenary talks was not on a new therapeutic or a new diagnostic, but on a very simple digital intervention that surveyed patients weekly about their symptoms and side effects, and then was able to intervene and manage those patients. And that simple intervention outperformed 13 of the 14 new drugs that were approved that year in terms of the bottom line of overall survival and 5-year survival. So this was a profound moment for us in realizing that sometimes the way we deliver care and the way that these new drugs enter the system and are disseminated to patients can be just as impactful on the bottom line of cancer patient survival as some of the new tools, new therapeutics themselves. And so in many ways, we realize that the story of great scientific progress against disease doesn't end at the FDA. It still needs to enter and transform the medical system. And in many ways, it's only the beginning of getting these new discoveries to everyone.
Yeah. I've read that it takes 17 years to get something from bench to bedside. Do you feel like digital health has a role there to just speed up the accelerate getting these drugs to the right people in a safe, equitable manner?
Absolutely. And I think that's often only when it first gets to the bedside in some form, but it still has to get to everyone. We still have to figure out how we pay for it. Oftentimes, some of the new cutting edge therapies that Reid described don't even have the facilities to distribute them. Things like radiopharmaceuticals available to patients in all geographies. So there's a whole transformation of the system that still has to occur in order to get the best cutting edge science to really make a difference at scale for patients.
Yeah. Cancer drug prices are higher than ever, yet survival benefits are starting to become more modest. How do you guys think about kind of aligning innovation with what we're talking about, like patient access and real world value of these drugs that we're bringing forward? Because they're not, I would say it's like we're not getting the bang for our buck anymore.
Totally. So Hallie, this is something that I've tried to tackle for a really long time, because it's really frustrating to me that we spend so much time and effort designing really wicked smart new drugs that we take from total fantasy. We make them real. We take them through arduous clinical trials, and it takes a decade, and the failure rates are so high. And let's say we do all of that. We run the gauntlet. We are still not able to price them. And then that is handed off to basically insurers and pharmaceutical companies to price all these things. And that authority is ripped from us. And instead of actually having any control about how these things are disseminated, we as investors and as entrepreneurs have no power as to how this is really taken by the marketplace. So that to me is a level of passivity that I am completely not okay with. And Matt feels the exact same way. So we are then struck with a bit of a dilemma, because we don't want to become a pharmaceutical company. I don't know about you, Hallie. That doesn't sound very fun. No, that sounds horrible. So instead, what we're trying to do is make the entire system substantially more efficient. And this is where we actually have real advances that we can make, and where we can make a discrete difference ourselves. So one great example here would be the development of, say, synthetic comparator arms in phase 3 clinical trials. The biggest driver of cost for cancer drugs historically is the failure rate and cost of phase 3 clinical trials. So for oncology drugs in the United States, it costs about around $250 million for a phase 3 cancer product. And only one out of those 3 is actually going to succeed and get through FDA approval. So right there, the failure rates are unbelievably high. And just from a financial management point of view, that is pretty dire. So the biggest drivers of cost for those clinical trials are the 2 arms you have to recruit. The active arm, which is your drug. Let's say I'm making a breast cancer drug against Herceptin, and the active arm is my sexy new drug. Well, the control arm is going to be Herceptin, and that's going to be conserved for every breast cancer trial against that in the US. Well, instead of duplicating the efforts to recruit and make those control arms, if the FDA could work with industry to make a standard synthetic arm, that would actually obviate the need for a control arm and half the amount of patients you would need for a clinical trial. Now, this would dramatically increase the speed and radically lower the cost of a phase 3 clinical trial, which is the biggest line item in the whole system. So that's a really good example of where we're driving at some of the biggest costs right now as quickly as possible.
And what is Yosemite's role as a venture fund and grant maker in really pushing regulatory to think about cancer research differently?
Our role is really the same one that we have in our life science side in creating the next generation of companies that have the ability to do that. So I think Matt should talk about really Atropos, our first example of this, which kind of demonstrated our model.
Yeah. Tell us about it, Matt.
Yeah, this was another area where we, I think, didn't expect the work we were doing in the therapeutics world to translate quite beautifully into the digital health sector. We had a fascinating conversation with some researchers at Stanford and ended up writing a grant to support some of their work. And so the very first grant that we wrote that was really into a data science lab ended up going through quite a bit of development and then being translated to form Atropos Health. So the very first grant we wrote into this sector became a scaled digital health company. So we thought that was really great validation of what we're doing in funding research, but then also being able to get it to scale. And I think as it impacts the area that we're talking about here in drug pricing and in precision therapy, there is a bit of a flip side and an unintended consequence to precision medicine as we're building these amazing therapies that target smaller and smaller populations. Very naturally, to fund the cost of research, the price has to go up. And so we really believe that once those drugs come to market, it's on us and we have to be involved in using them on the right patients, making sure we can look at real world evidence and find out when they're working and when they're not, figuring out the true cost of them to the system and the downstream costs, and really driving at value once cutting edge new scientific therapies come into the market.
We've talked about therapies, but what about on the other side of diagnostics? What about kind of earlier detection of cancer? We're seeing a lot of these new screening companies come online. How do you guys view that within the investment thesis of Yosemite?
Sure. We've been involved for years in some great new diagnostic approaches. I think there have been a whole generation of new cancer blood tests that have been exciting. But it's a great example of what we mentioned, that these generate some evidence and they come to market, and then the system has to figure out what populations to use these on, where there's economic value, where the health economics make sense to screen healthy populations. And that's where we're at with that generation of technology. They're finding the right niche where they can create value. And there is some great value there. We haven't yet realized the dream of a simple blood test that can detect many cancers that's both sensitive and specific. But also, I think in diagnostics, there's another angle of it. We have many great screening modalities. There are somewhere around 7 or 8 recommended screenings for different people and different types of populations and different points in their lives. And adherence to those is often not very high. So there was a great study last year published showing that the very most impactful cancer screening modality that's recommended, which is low-dose chest CT for lung cancer, is actually the least utilized. Only around 10% of recommended patients utilize this screening. And so there's a behavior problem here as well of how do we make this work for people? How do we fit this into people's lives in a way that's easy and makes sense for them and makes them do what they surely want to do on a long time frame here of get on top of their health and get on top of their cancer screenings.
That's exactly right. So we've been involved with a lot of companies in the diagnostic sector. And, Hallie, every cancer that has a biomarker-based early detection method or a radiological one, whether that's a colonoscopy, mammogram, PSA, all of those have lower mortality rates. And this isn't rocket science because cancer is a disease of mutational accrual and cellular division. So the longer that happens, the more mutations accrue and the more advanced the cancer becomes. Therefore, the earlier you can find it, the fewer mutations have happened. So the more tractable and treatable the disease is. With cancer, it is that simple. So we've been looking at this for a really long time. Obviously, there have been huge cases of fraud in the liquid biopsy space. And that is one that we think is still going to have a long way to go before it has real large-scale clinical viability. On the other hand, there's a huge amount that we can do to actually optimize the existing diagnostics that we have on the market, whether that's mammograms, colonoscopies, pap smears, PSAs. All of that can actually be far more sensitive, and people are already used to doing that. So one of the companies that Matt helped lead that I am the most proud of that Yosemite's been a part of, and this has been one of our first approvals actually, by the RFK FDA, yikes, has been something called Teal Health, which is the first at-home self-administered pap smear. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, it actually does not have a greater sensitivity than what you'd see at a doctor's office. So, it's not going to be more accurate, but obviously it is something that preserves your privacy. It really helps access because it means you don't have to travel to the doctor's office. And it helps the doctor because they can repurpose that space and that time for other reasons. As we all know, that's hugely valuable time and space. So this is actually one of those rare things with really no downside. There's no side effect. There's honestly only savings to the entire healthcare system. And this is only going to help women by catching cervical cancer earlier. And this is going to save lives and soon. It's a fantastic advancement.
Yeah. I love Teal. That's such a great example because we also are seeing more women are getting birth control virtually. And in doing so, perhaps they're not doing their PAP as frequently as they should and are disenfranchised for some reason. And now they are able to get birth control. They're able to have virtual care for nearly everything else at home. So being able to also do the cervical cancer screening at home makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Comes through the mail. It's so easy.
Yeah, that's right. And I think cancer screening is this kind of wicked behavioral economics problem. It's this long-term, low probability event. Often these screenings are uncomfortable, they're invasive. And so it's this perfect thing to just never quite be your top priority to go do on any given day. And we think the solution there is to make it easier for people, make it come to the home, make it opt out instead of opt in. And that's the way you're going to close the gap between recommended screenings and actual screenings.
Earlier, you said, I want to be the first generation where we don't lose our parents to cancer, but we are seeing an increase in cancer incidence in folks under 50. Why and what can we do about this?
We don't know. It's a mystery. And it's very real statistically, particularly in colon cancer. There's a colon cancer epidemic of under 45s. And this is after you control for things like obesity and diet. It's not just like mirroring America's obesity epidemic, which is very serious, but it's a separate issue. And no one knows. So I certainly am not here to speculate. I have no idea. But it is a really serious phenomenon. And it is one that probably is outpacing the current colonoscopy guidelines.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I personally know a lot of women and have quite a few friends that have had breast cancer. That seems like a topic of conversation, but we do have kind of the screenings down. We have a ton of awareness. We have Breast Cancer Month. So I do feel like we've kind of caught up in terms of public health awareness around breast cancer, but you don't really hear about colon cancer screening.
This is an underreported phenomenon. It's very, very significant, and it's one that is partially influenced by COVID because, of course, as you can imagine, screenings plummeted and bookings for screenings plummeted during the COVID era for obvious reasons. And it has taken us many years to even get back to 2019 levels of adherence there. So that is a bit of a lagging phenomenon. It is not remotely adequate to explain what is going on. So there is something happening right now, and we don't know what it is.
We have to talk about the NIH funding cuts. So they've raised quite a bit of concern in our field. How do you guys think that this will affect the trajectory of cancer innovation? And obviously you guys are doing a ton around philanthropy and grant making, but can it be enough? Is there enough kind of private sector philanthropy to make up for the NIH cuts?
Well, of course not. So there's sort of three elements that get a little bit muddled right now. So first of all, you've got the actual budgets that are being done by the appropriations committees in Congress. And I actually think this is the biggest deal of all, because this is going to be setting NIH and NCI dollars moving forward, and any kind of impoundment activity is going to be highly scrutinized from that. So you actually are seeing the appropriations committees passing budgets at continuing resolution levels to historic funding levels, meaning they're not cutting drastically. So we actually are somewhat hopeful that Congress is going to maintain NIH and NCI funding levels at their where they have been historically, which I believe is, frankly, the bare minimum. I think we should be doubling this, but at the very least, we should be keeping it as it has been. The administration, as you know, gives out a desired budget. which has no force of law at all, thank goodness. But this administration did put out a budget which slashed NIH draconianly by 40%, Hallie. And the biggest cut of all time happened in 2009 in the wake of the great financial crisis, and it was 1%, and it was for 1 year. So we are not in a financial crisis right now, of course, and the notion that we would arbitrarily cut 40% is really just the biggest present to China that this administration's ever given, but more importantly is completely out of step with what Congress and what the entire American public wants. So it luckily has been rightfully discarded as a policy idea. But as you can imagine, given where this administration is, this is going to be a fight that's going to be coming back and back and back again. The third thing that is happening has been the cutting of particular programs by HHS. And this is something that's happening right now. And I think it is absolutely hurting cancer patients and hurting cancer research. The best example of this is the mRNA vaccine funding pull by HHS, which is drastically going into cancer vaccine research. And for no reason at all has that been pulled other than anti-vax ideology.
So what do we do? What do, for the founders listening that want to remain hopeful that we can progress in digital health and healthcare outcomes overall, we try to be optimistic on this podcast. It's been hard lately because there's just been a lot of big blows to healthcare, whether that's Medicaid cuts, NIH, whatever. There's been a lot to contend with. Maybe Matt, like what are you telling founders now who still want to remain hopeful and do great work despite kind of the environment and how it feels like healthcare is being positioned in the United States?
Change is always an opportunity in some form, even if it's against a headwind. And people are getting creative. I think people are looking for novel ways of funding great ideas. And look, it's not something we are positive about. We see great entrepreneurs trying to figure it out.
You're positive about this? About the opportunity?
Oh, I'm very positive about this, actually, Hallie. This isn't an opportunity, in my opinion. But what has happened is that in the last few years, medical funding has gone from a non-political issue to a political issue. And that is certainly not how I wish things had gone, but I'm not in control. So we need to accept that this has become a political issue. And we therefore need to enter that arena and know what the rules are and what the stakes are. And if you look at polling, medical and particularly cancer research is something that is north of 90% approval rating. So I don't want to have to make this a political fight at all. This is it very much. It's actually one of the best economic investments we can make. It's one of the best moral investments we can make. And it's actually what a great national security investment. It's patently obvious. It's supported by 90% of Americans. I feel pretty strong about that negotiating position. Hallie, I think we're holding some pretty strong cards right now. And I think the other side has no idea what they're doing and is on the side of disease. And that's insane. So I feel really strong about where we are.
You said that, you mentioned a gift to China. Maybe you guys can kind of talk about how we're viewing cancer care globally, right? Like, why can't any advancement anywhere be an advancement everywhere? You know, we're always thinking about the U.S. being as fast and innovative as possible, but is there a world for us to transcend boundaries in cancer care, in healthcare, where we're all together as humans, no matter where we're based?
Like any big industry, the next generation of innovation is going to be driven by only a handful of companies. A lot of people are going to try, and there's only going to be a few that are really going to be the leaders that are actually going to achieve that success. And what we need to decide right now is where are we comfortable with those companies being that are going to hold the keys to huge amounts of human health? Do we want them to be American, or do we want them to be in other parts of the world? And right now, China's the obvious leader because they're investing so much in here in the sector from the top down. And I want it to be an American company. I think we have a fantastic track record, and I believe that we can disseminate this far more efficiently and far more equitably than our peers can. So absolutely, I think it's not really a race. I think it's more of a question of where are these things going to live?
Matt, your thoughts?
I think there are many complexities to the U.S. healthcare system, and there are many parts of it that we're often critical of, and that I know that you and your guests often are. But on the optimistic side, the U.S. delivers the best cancer care in the world. This is where you want to go to be seen for cancer care. And so there are great discoveries made all over the world, and everyone can benefit from those, and we want to encourage that everywhere. But I do think there's a great interest in the U.S. maintaining its scientific leadership in this sector and being the leading and guiding light for the world in that. And there can be competition on that, but we should compete.
Amen to that.
We've been so good at this, Hallie. Come on. We've made this whole industry possible. We wanted to keep going.
After JP Morgan this year, there was just a lot of talk on, I'm not a life sciences person, but I overhear things. I read stat news. And there was a lot of talk about how kind of everybody's new strategy was just like licensing the drugs coming out of China. And that was kind of like, is this the future? Is this how our model is going to be now?
I do not believe that this is the end of American biotechnological innovation or leadership. It's going to be more challenging, and it's going to be one that we need to, frankly, invest in a lot more ourselves at the top of the funnel, especially as private organizations. We need a lot more people to copy Yosemite's model and actually give grants out in a non-dilutive way to universities here. We need to be investing so much more in our basic science. So that is all good. But I really believe that 90% of people who want this to be solved is not changing. And we maintain, I believe, our ability to be leaders here.
I think that's exactly right. This is a time when we should be leaning in and trying to figure out how to lower the cost to get therapies to market, and taking advantage of our great scientific community and infrastructure, and not moving the other way.
Matt, knowing that you are Yosemite's digital health guy, what do you want to see? Like, for anyone out there working on ideas, tinkering around in this space, like, who should give you a call?
Well, we think cancer, in a really interesting way, operates at an extreme of healthcare delivery. It's this most thoroughly subtyped disease area. It comes in these acute episodes. But we really believe that often the extremes of a field can help inform the best way to build the future of the mainstream. So we're always really excited about companies that cancer needs in areas like real world evidence, in areas really pushing the boundaries of using data to inform care, in areas looking at how to bring the right expert to the right patient, because in cancer care, often there may only be one or two true experts in the country on your specific disease. And we really look at companies that want to do that at scale and bring that to everything in cancer and out of cancer, and really transform the healthcare system using this disease to inform the way that healthcare should go in the future.
I love that. So any founders listening, you know when to reach out to Matt. He's excited to connect. Reid, any final thoughts on the topics that we're discussing here today?
Yes. I think it is incredible that the tale of two worlds of healthcare is a dissonance that we are working tirelessly to close. Because what we can achieve on the cutting edge therapeutic side is really science fiction at this point. I mean, we're talking like taking your cells out and re-engineering them and then putting them back in you and have them go after cancer. You know, this is cutting edge gene and epigenetic therapy as you thought it might be one day. And the dissonance between that and the like 1989 style infrastructure we have in our healthcare practices, from data gathering to data sharing to the patient experience, which is abysmal, is not only absurd, but it's literally killing people. And it's so unacceptable to me that we actually just abide in a system that is this anachronistic for this long. So I guess, Hallie, you should just know that we are pretty insistent that this has to change. And we really do not accept anything less than what we would want for ourselves. And we're all going to eventually get older, and I'm not going to allow us to get to a place where our generation has the same problems that our parents had delivered in the same way. So that is what Matt and I are here to really upscale, and that is where we're coming from.
Awesome. Well, keep going. Thank you for all that you guys are doing. And founders, you can connect with Matt and Reed from Yosemite. They're so excited to connect with founders working in digital health and making cancer non-lethal. You guys, thank you again.
Thanks, Hallie.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Hallie Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Krause, and Hallie Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized, so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.